Okay, here we go. One, two. There you go, everybody. That song is called Floating Down the Old Green River, and it was written in 1915. The guy who wrote the words is Bert Calmer, and the music was written by Joe Cooper, written in 1915. Played on a horn, also written in 1915. Now, the guy wasn't literally floating down a green river. Here's the story behind that, and I think you're going to find this interesting. This is the humor of the early 1900s. Green River was the name of a whiskey in those days. And the guy got home at 4:30 in the morning, and his wife was trying to question him as, why are you coming home so late? So he said, I was floating or drinking the whole Green River before I could find my way back to you. Anyway, that's the story of it there. And I like to come up with interesting things, odd things to start the show off, because that's the unique thing about this show. In all of TV or all the internet, it's the only place you're going to go where you want to hear an interview or a talk like my guest and I are going to give this morning. Guy comes on and plays a horn, plays a song 50 or 100 years old. Where do you find it? Right here on Life After Scientology. And I'm your host, Ron Miscavige. I'm going to put my horn away. Now, I have a very good guest on. Well, not good. He's great as far as I'm concerned. He's a brilliant surgeon. Of course, he used to be a doctor, but he lost his patience. I'll introduce him in a second. But I want to take up a subject before we get started. And that is this. And this is a datum or a fact that I've known for many years. It's called relative importance. And it's something that you can use in life. I want to share it with you because see what you think of this. Here would be an example of relative importance. Let's say you were going to take a journey into space to go to another planet. What would relatively more important be? The color of your space uniforms or how much oxygen you had for the trip? Obviously, it's oxygen. That's relatively more important. So that would go to the top of the list of importances, and you could think with that. You can use this in life in many things that you want to do. Now, there's a story that's tied to this of when I was at the international base in Hemet. And here's what it is. There was a guy, well, there still is a guy, I hope. I hope he's still around. He's a very nice individual named Barry Stein, who was an architect and also an accordion player. But he also played piano, but his first instrument that he was trained on, and a really superior instrumentalist on it, was an accordion. Barry got, through whatever he did or his attitude, the executives or an executive mad at him, took him off his post, which was in the International Landlord's office, and put him to work in the laundry room on the base. So what Barry Stein did was fold towels and sheets. That's where the towels and the sheets were washed, that the people at the international base used to put in their beds and take showers with. He folded towels, folded sheets, pressed pants, pressed shirts for executives. That's what he did all day. His senior was Gertie Wagner, who ran that laundry room. As a musician, we were doing a piece of music, and I think it was for a movie. As a matter of fact, it was, where we needed an accordion player to play. And I think, just my memory serves me, it was to indicate that this was taking place in Italy. So it was the perfect instrument. Now, Barry Stein could have come in the studio and just ripped that part apart. Like in 10 minutes, he would have nailed a perfect performance. He was that good. So we asked Gertie, his senior, if we could use him that evening to play a part on a piece of music that only he could do out of the entire base. She turned us down because she felt it was more important for him to fold towels and sheets and do the work in the laundry room. Now think about that. What mind could evaluate that his folding sheets or towels or pressing shirts, which you could train anybody to do in maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes or an hour if they were slow, but to be able to have the expertise and musicianship, literally a virtuoso type accordion player, maybe 1 in 100,000 could do it over a period of 10 years. Well, I will tell you what type of mind. The mind of a person who's been brainwashed, where they think their standard for being a good base member would be to do their job and don't let anything interfere with it or anything make their statistic go down. Couldn't see past that. Whereas if Barry came over, it would contribute, of course, it's bullshit, we all know right now, to the expansion of Scientology. Anyway, that's just a story I wanted to relate to you. And maybe you can think of things in your own life where you violate it yourself. Relative importance, where you're going to do something. Well, let me think, what are the relatively more important things I should do to further my purpose? Anyway, I think you get the point. So without any further words on this, and I wanted to bring it up because I enjoy that datum and I've used it in my life quite a bit, and I feel it's pretty important. Relative importance is important. Okay, so please welcome, wait, before I do that, I have some patrons to thank because we had a bunch this week. And if you out there who don't know what Patron is, you can go to my website, therealronmiscavige.com, and it will show you how to become a patron, which you contribute something to this show on a monthly basis, and it helps the ongoingness of it. Okay? So, first of all, we have Red Scare, who is a patron for $2. Thank you very much, Red. And by the way, that was my brother's nickname, Red, because he had red hair, obviously. And then we have Maggie Johnson, who became a patron for $1. Thank you very much, Maggie. Karen May, $5, and I thank you very much, Karen. Emma Jean, $5. Thank you, Emma. Very much appreciate it. And George Cole, also $5. George, thank you very much. It is all appreciated. And those of you who would like to, please contribute, become a patron, become a supporter of the show, and it'll help us to keep this show going. And you'll feel better too. You turn from being a listener or a spectator into an ongoing participant. You're doing something about it. So without any further words, please welcome Chris Shelton. Chris, good morning, and it's great having you on the show, my friend. What have you been up to lately?
Oh, quite a bit. Thanks, Ron, for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I wanted to comment really quickly, if I could, on your point there on relative importance, because you're nailing it on that. It is something that it's almost one of those manufactured tools that we talk about, that they use, these control things they use. And the way is because you lose sight of the big picture because you're so micromanaged into, like you said, your statistics.
Yep.
Or whatever other nonsense you're involved in, that you can't see the big picture. You just can't see it because you're so locked into the punishment you're going to receive if your little part of the world doesn't, if your statistic doesn't go up a little bit, then you're for it.
Yeah.
And that's universal all throughout Scientology. And so people do lose sight of the big picture because of that. And so when people say that, brainwashing doesn't work or isn't a thing or doesn't exist, you go, no, man, it actually does. It changes how we see everything. And
Yeah.
and I just wanted to throw that in there because I thought you hit on a very important point there.
No, you're right, Chris. And because if Gertie's stat would have gone down, then she would have caught hell. And the people who managed her production don't want to know that Barry went and played accordion. They also can't see the big picture. Just to add to what you just said.
Exactly. It's a whole chain of events, and it's because all these people are locked into this micro viewpoint of things, and that's why, especially in the Sea Org at the highest levels, they don't know what's going on in the big wide world. They don't have the time to find out, so they can't educate themselves out of that situation, and it's rough.
Yeah. Well, not only they can't, they're prevented from seeing the big picture.
Exactly.
I mean, you're not allowed to watch television or go on the internet and see anything that anybody says against Scientology. So anyway, getting into what we're going to do this morning, we're taking questions. So this is a Ask Me Anything for me or Chris or both of us. So Sean, my producer, you were signaling me. Do you have a question now?
Oh, yeah, we got a bunch. If you guys are ready, we got a bunch.
Okay.
Let's bring it.
Let's do it. Maddie Odegaard asks, what other cults would you like to cover eventually? Thanks so much for all that you do, Ron.
Well, I'll tell you I don't know if I would say I want another cult to cover, although I will do that, and I'm anybody who wants to come on from another cult. But if I can keep on exposing the think that is common to all these cults, I think that's going to proof people up for getting involved in one. Chris, what do you think about that?
I think that's exactly right. I do exactly the same thing. That's how I got involved in talking with former Jehovah's Witnesses and former Mormons and Christian cults. I mean, there's 5,000 plus, numbers of these groups out there. There's tons and tons of them. But Ron's nailing it because it is the same thinking and the same control processes that are used. So when you understand one, you really can get a broad view of all of them. And that's very, very helpful for everybody coming out of all of these groups, and very good for proofing people up from getting into them in the first place.
Yeah, there you go. All right, then.
No, that's
go on,
good.
Sean.
That's
I hope
good.
we answered that question, but
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Janet Reisenwitz asks or states, I'm just learning a lot of this mess. My question, I thought Scientology folks were not allowed to be on the internet and had limited TV time, which is kind of something you just talked about, Ron.
Yeah, well, that is true. Wait, her name is Janet Reisenwitz?
Reisenwitz.
Watch, a unique name, man.
Yeah.
That's.
I hope I said it right.
Well, you're going to be punished, not me. Well, no, when you're in Scientology, if you're working as a staff member in an organization where public come in and get services, you're not living on the premises as you are when you're a Sea Organization member. In the Sea Org, it is absolutely banned for you to get onto the internet to see anything that says anything bad about Scientology or David or any executives or L. Ron Hubbard. You're banned. As a staff member in an organization, you're told you can't do it. And if you do it, they do frequent security checks, and they'll come up with the fact that you did it on an e-meter and you got to do a lower condition. So that's how it's enforced. Do you agree with that, Chris? Because you worked in an organization where they delivered it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. And just to further on how they ban it, they actually have a filter system, because they do now allow Sea Org members on the basis limited internet access, but it's like being on the internet in China. They control the gate to the internet, so they filter out everything having to do with Scientology. You literally cannot find the anti-Scientology material if you're on the internet on a Sea Org base, public and staff. They filter all of them. And exactly what you said, at the public level and at the staff member level, they self-police because they know that the consequences of it coming up that they've been looking at the bad stuff is going to mean thousands of dollars more that they're going to have to pay for the sec checking and the amends and the atonement and all that. And after a while, they just go, why am I bothering to do this? It's easier for me to just keep that information away from me. And then you've effectively banned them from it, even without having to tell them you're banned from this. They don't talk like that. They just say, why would you look at that? That's all lies. The truth is all right here. what would prompt you to do that? And that's just the beginning of the whole interrogation process.
I know it's true. Then you have people policing themselves.
Yep.
Well, I'll tell you, I told this story on a program quite a while ago, but I'll just relate it again because there's a similar think on it, and that is how to train fleas. And what you do if you want to train fleas is you get them and you put them in a jar, a big jar, and put food in there so they don't die, and put couple little holes in the top so there's air. And these fleas will jump up, and you hear like dink, 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 where they're hitting the tin lid of the jar, and they're still alive. And after a while, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 days, you don't hear any more dink, dink, but they're still alive. Now, you can take the lid off and they'll only jump as high as the lid was. So they have it built in not to go any further than that. You've got them to police themselves. You no longer have to put a lid on it. And this is what happens to people in Scientology. This is one of the most clever scams and cons that you can run into. It's unbelievable. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that little illustration.
That's a great analogy for that.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yep. Okay, Sean.
All right. Karen asks, Chris, have you ever thought about starting an overarching X group for ex-Scientologists, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses to support each other and learn more about critical thinking?
I have not thought about doing that myself as a founder or something, starting some kind of a group like that. The work that I do exposing these different groups through my channel and the education that I provide is pretty much my niche. That's my service. That's what I can do and the value that I offer. But getting into the support business and that side of things I think it requires more people who are better qualified than I am to do that kind of work. And so I refer in that direction. I interview people who do that kind of work, but I think education is where I'm best suited.
Yeah, Chris, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your channel and what you do? I'm interested in our listeners understanding this, because I'd like to have a lot of my listeners go to your channel and see what you have to say also.
Awesome, thank you. My channel basically is a sort of a chronology or sort of a track of me leaving Scientology.
Chris, hold it.
Yep.
How did they get to your channel? Let's start with that.
Oh, it's on YouTube. Yeah, it's Chris Shelton. If you just Google Chris Shelton YouTube, I come right up, and that's the name of my channel. And it's about me as a critical thinker, developing critical thinking skills over the last 6 years after leaving Scientology, and not professing. I am not, I identify as the critical thinker at large. What that means is that I am learning and passing on the knowledge as I'm learning it. I'm not on some soapbox of telling people what to think or how to think or what to do. I'm trying to learn myself and then pass the knowledge on as I go. And I've exposed a great deal of Scientology in the process. So I've posted well over 600 videos at this point. I've been pretty productive. Wow. Talked about a lot of different aspects of Scientology, and I've done a lot of interviews with other former Scientologists or psychologists, therapists, counselors, sociologists about the topic of cult mind control, manipulation, coercive persuasion, how these things work, what the mechanisms are, and even recently getting into the physiology and the neurology of it, which I find absolutely fascinating. When you understand more about how our brains work, you understand the processes that are going on with these deceptive cults and with sales and advertising and propaganda and all of it. It's all kind of fits in one big bag. So it's been quite an education for me, and I'm kind of bringing people along for the ride. That's basically how my channel is put together.
Wow.
And I've had a lot of fun and gotten way more support and assistance from people than I ever imagined I would when I started doing this a few years ago.
That's great, man. No, you're providing a good service. Matter of fact, the more I hear you talk about it, I really think you should name it Chris Shelton. I used to be a doctor, but I lost my patience.
I do too. I love that. I'm going to totally steal that line. I love that.
Go ahead. It's fine with me. I mean, I'll tell you who said that to me, a guy by the name of Nelson Sandy. Nelson, if you're watching this, I thank you very much. This is well, he still is a dear friend. He's still alive and kicking. He's a singer and a very good singer. And he said this to me in the 60s when we were, palling around those days. And I kept it, and I still think it's funny. He also was great at one-liners. One time we're playing a job up in Greenwood Lakes, New York. As a matter of fact, he owned this nightclub. And we came off the stage, and the bar was called the Contiki. We came off the stage, went to the bar. A guy came over and said, "Nelson, you're a great singer. Can I buy you a drink?" He says, "No, but can I have the money?" I mean, he was quick on the uptake. He always had great lines. But anyway, yeah, I'm glad you gave that little talk about it, because that'll give a better understanding of people who are watching my show and they've never seen yours. And also people from your show, maybe they can watch me occasionally. And
Exactly.
play a 100-year-old horn. Where the hell are you going to go and hear that? All right. Okay, Sean.
All right. K. Viviano states, I understand there are several huge homes waiting for the return of L. Ron Hubbard. Is there a policy in place for how to recognize when he comes back in a different body?
Well, we can get into this, and I'm going to. All right. And there is the big home that was built at the international base, also known as Gold. I don't know how many millions of dollars that home cost, but there was also another one on that same base, a rather small one, and it was called Bonneview, if my memory serves me. It was a very modest home. Now, that home could have been torn down when the other one was built. That big home is the one that would be for the United States. But I also think there's one that was turned into a showpiece in Phoenix or Wichita. And of course, you're going to have to forgive me, because it's been some years since I was connected up with the church, and I'm not exactly sure whether it was Wichita or Kansas, but it's a showpiece. So people come there to see how that home was when he gave lectures in that area way back in the 50s or maybe early 60s. Chris, do you have any other information on that?
Not hard data, because I was never exposed to any sort of policy or anything regarding handling L. Ron Hubbard coming back.
Other homes.
Oh, sure. Well, there's the Camelback home in Phoenix. There's also the home down in South Africa when he was down
wait a
there.
minute. The Camelback home is the one I was talking about.
Yep, that's in Phoenix.
In Phoenix. All right. And then the one in Africa, you say?
Yeah, there's one in South Africa. I think Johannesburg. I believe there's one in there should be a property in New Jersey when he was out there. I think they purchased that property also.
Well, but here's the thing now. I know about those, but as far as I know, they're actually like showpieces that people can come and see how it was when he lived there. They're not places for him to come back to. The one at the international base is the only one that I know that would be exclusively for him to come back and reside in. Do you follow me?
I believe that's true. I'm wondering if the Trementia and the other bases where they have the archive stuff. Yeah. I've heard there's houses there too, but I could be, I might be imagining things on that. But I thought that there were also Hubbard houses on those bases also.
Right, and there could very well be, and of course I wouldn't know about that either unless I just accidentally ran into it. But now, as far as an office, there is an office that L. Ron Hubbard can walk into and use in every organization in the world. The L. Ron Hubbard office. You follow me?
Yep, that's right. Every single organization has an office for him.
I mean, you wouldn't sleep in there unless you fell asleep in a chair while you're doing your work, you know. But now let's get back into what policy is there to recognize him. I'll tell you what policy there is. Zero, nada, nothing. He said in some archival stuff that he may come back as a politician.
That's right.
And there is no sign of him as a politician who's come back, who said, you know, I used to be L. Ron Hubbard. So as far as him coming back, absolutely no sign of it. And I don't know if there ever will be. Who knows? Look at the Eastern religions that believe in reincarnation, some of them say you're going to come back right away. Others say there's 1,500 years between reincarnations. And other ones say that if you get cursed, so you go back to where you started getting reincarnated into higher forms of life, you go back to being an insect and you have to live 84,000 different lives. These are interesting points, and provable. I don't know if they're provable. Maybe somebody can prove it. I couldn't prove it one way or the other. But policy about him coming back, there is no written policy.
None of the religions say that people will come back as con men that write science fiction novels, though.
Well, Sean made the point of points. I mean, would John Dillinger come back and say, okay, I used to be John Dillinger and I've come back to be a killer? Okay.
Katrina Marshall asks, what about being in the Marines helped you with leaving Scientology, Ron?
Well, I guess, yeah, it did help. And there's no two ways about it, because look, prior to going in the Marine Corps, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I enjoyed music. I was playing in clubs when I was 13 years old, and I continued to play in them all throughout high school. And, you know, I got out of school, and my father, if I were to go to college, wanted me to study business. I had no interest whatever. If I figured I'd want to go to college, wanted to study music, I didn't prepare myself for it. I was kind of like a cork floating in the sea, you know, just kind of going along with everything. And I met a Marine Corps recruiter on the main street in my town. And for whatever reason, I thought, I want to be a Marine. That was it. My dad had a sign for me because I was only 17. I joined. First night in boot camp, I said, this is the worst fucking mistake I've ever made in my life. You ever see Full Metal Jacket? That's how it was. A couple months later, we're finishing boot camp. I said to myself, I can make myself do anything. It turned me from an undisciplined civilian into a disciplined Marine. And I couldn't put a price on that. Now, what did it help me as far as leaving? I knew after so many years, of course, I've been in Scientology for 42 years, but I was in the Sea Organization for 26 and a half. Really, I joined the Sea Organization to help spread this religion, because I literally thought that if everybody knew about it, life would improve for every man, woman, and child on the planet. As the years went by, it started to sink into me, as much as I didn't want to believe it, that I was living a bit of a lie. And then it came to the point where I knew I was leading a big lie. There was no way, with all the activities and all of the messages we would get into our in baskets on communications, that this would lead to a planet where people were freer to think what they wanted to think, could lead better lives, where you wouldn't have wars anymore. The activities were not going to lead to that. The activities were going to lead to make more money, so Scientology would become richer and fight off people who wanted to expose it for what it was, so they could keep on defending it to make more and more money. As a Marine, you know, they say once a Marine, always a Marine. I will tell you, the attitude that I got, if I wanted to do something, I knew I could do it. Now, also, I got to the point where I felt I was on the ground and I was being stomped on. Not literally physically, but beaten down as an individual who could think for himself. The Marine Corps attitude states, fuck you, man. You're coming after me. I'm coming after you. So maybe that's how it helped. I could say more, but I think you got the point.
Dr. Phelps says, hey guys, I see Sea Org members on the streets of Copenhagen often. I want to say something to them, but I never do. I guess what he's trying to say is it worth it? Do you have that conversation?
Chris?
Absolutely. Absolutely have that conversation if you have the opportunity to. Do it in a friendly, light fashion. You know, it's not something you have to go and think that you're going to do some street intervention. It doesn't work that way. The best thing you can do is ask questions, personal questions, insightful questions, questions like, you know, like, tell me about your life. How is it going? Do you get to read books? You know, things, I mean, just silly things, but they actually matter, because the kind of questions you can ask a person in that kind of a situation are only planting seeds. That's all you're going to be able to do in that kind of a situation, unless you happen to run across somebody who literally is on the fence already and wants to go. But generally, they don't put people like that on the street. So, you know, so that's the best advice I've found to give.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I'll add one thing to that. Don't make them wrong.
Exactly.
Don't say, how could you be so stupid? How could you be so dumb? Listen, if somebody said that to you, how would you feel? You'd say, hey, fuck you, man.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the end of it. But do as Chris says, make it lighthearted. Just ask them questions where they can describe their life. And maybe they might come to realize a little later, but maybe not talking to you. Wait a minute. Let me think. How am I living? God
That's
damn it.
exactly.
You know, so
Exactly.
you plant the seed. It's very, very well said, Chris.
Jenny G with a super chat for €5. Is there anyone specific still in who you'd like to see out? I'll donate to Chris after his video finishes. Thank you, Jenny. Is there anybody that's in that you'd like to see out?
Well, I'll start that question. I would like to see everybody out.
Yeah.
All right. But I would say there's probably people I was closer to when I was in a Sea organization or in just as a regular paying Scientologist that I would enjoy their friendship more than others. Let's face it, there's a couple people who got out that were so bad to me, and other people and other staff members. If I never saw them again, it would be too soon. Okay. But as far as people being in there, yeah, I'd like to see everybody out. Just come out and live your life in the world and contribute to the society that we have. Try to make it better. And one way you could make it better is talk other people into not going into cults. Or if you have a good friend who's in and you have that close of a communication line, try to talk them out of it. Chris, you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto everything you said. Certainly everybody. We want everyone out. There are, like you said, also a very, very tiny number of people, really I can count on one hand, who I never, ever, ever, ever want to see again, and would have a pretty hard time forgiving or dealing with if they came out. But by far, there are far more people who I would very much like to reconnect with and see again. Friends I had for decades in Scientology. I won't name their names here because doesn't really matter. But people I worked with, people I was friends with, my ex-wife. I don't bear her any ill will. I hope she gets out. So yeah, a ton of people.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. I don't feel like naming the names, because if OSA goes over it, they'll take those names and go to where the person is working, and they got to do a sec check. You know what I mean?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's no reason to make their lives even worse.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
We'll throw them under the bus if we do that.
Holy shit.
Yep.
That's how it goes.
Dr. Phelps asks a really good question here. What would be the one thing that someone could have said to you that would make you think twice about the cult you were in, or at least would have made you think twice about the cult you were in?
Wait, say that question again and say it a little slower. Because
what would be the one thing that someone could have said to you that would have made you think twice about being in Scientology while you were in? What was one thing someone could have challenged you on that might have thought you might have like broken the fourth wall?
Let me think about that for a second, because I'll be honest with you.
It's a good question.
I don't think there was anything that anybody could have said, because there were people who said things to me, like Donald Woodring, a guy I went to high school with, and he was in the FBI, and he got word to me. I don't remember how it got to me, but it wasn't a phone call or anything. Somehow a letter, and he said, L. Ron Hubbard is a con man, and I refused to believe it. So that's something that, if anybody said, are you out of your fucking mind? It wouldn't have worked because I was, all right? I mean, my thinking was so altered, and thinking that no matter what anybody said, I was going to continue on this journey because I literally thought we were going to save the planet. Literally. Now, when you're in that state of mind, people can point out things to you that if you looked and understood what you're looking at and it was against what you were doing, your mind was so justified in doing it that you would have justified that thing was wrong. Do you follow me?
Yep.
In other words, it's so clever that I don't know if there's anything you can say. I think Chris mentioned this a little while ago about planting the seed, because if you can plant that seed, this is actually what happened to me. I start looking at it when I was in the Sea organization, little things that didn't make sense, and I wouldn't dismiss them anymore.
Yeah.
And then another thing that didn't make sense, and another thing. And
1,000
these
cuts.
things started piling up, and I think, well, wait a minute, am I living a lie?
Yeah.
Is what I'm doing just bullshit? And of course it was, you know. Chris, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that this is why it's very important to listen more than talk when you're dealing with a cult member, Scientologist, or any other group, because in listening to what they say, they'll tell you where their weaknesses are, where the problems are, what they see as an issue. And those are the things you want to be directing questions about. I would say that it is very individual for each person you're talking to and the time you're talking to them, because there were different times, different phases I went through, I guess you could say, or different ups and downs that I experienced as a Scientologist and Sea Org member, where in one place at one time, this would have been the right thing to ask me, whereas later it would have been a different situation, a different circumstance. And so that's why I think that I encourage people to listen more than talk when they're dealing with people who are in these groups, because that's how you get the ammunition to know where's this person at, because everybody's their own person, and their circumstances and the context of their circumstances is unique. So I know that's very general. I know that doesn't really help with a single question, but that's kind of the point. There is no single gotcha question that you're going to be able to ask at all people in these groups, and they're going to go, ta-da. It doesn't work like that. You know,
no, but it's planting the seed. I think you mentioned this. That's the important thing. But what is that seed? Who knows? Just plant a lot of them.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
That's right. Because there are times where it could have been the money.
Yeah.
There were times where it could have been the food. There's times when it could have been, oh, I didn't see that movie, and I'm a cinephile. I love movies. So, oh my God, you haven't seen a movie in 3 years? Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. And that's it. Just say that and back off, you know, and the guys, and in the person's head, if that's something that's important to them, the wheels will start turning. That's how you do it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, Sean.
George Cole says, Ron, what is the significance of the two pictures behind you? And Dr. Phelps answers it correctly and says, it's just something the producer put up. Yeah, it's just something I put up. The pictures behind you.
So the significance of the pictures is that they're pictures.
Yeah.
And they look nice. And I'll tell you something. I like the job that Sean put the studio together.
Oh, hey, thanks, Ron.
And it's just comfortable, and it has a professional look. Of course,
Appreciate
all you
that.
see is my jacket and my shirt. I could be sitting here in pajama bottoms and you wouldn't know it. I'll tell you an interesting, well, it's interesting to me. Do you remember the movie The Godfather?
Mm-hmm.
A very famous movie in the 40s, and Al Pacino played the Godfather in that. There was one scene where he's sitting at a desk and he's talking to somebody, smoking a cigarette, which he always smokes cigarettes in that. And when the scene was finished being shot, he got up and he only had his underwear on. He had the suit jacket and a tie and looked dressed to the nines, but he got up and all he had on was underwear. Everybody laughed. It was a little bit of trivia I thought I'd pass on to you there. Anyway, go on.
All right. So we got Ashley. She says it's good to listen to both Ron and Chris. It's 1:15 a.m. here in Australia, and I'll be up watching the whole show because they are of a high quality and so informative.
Now, wait a minute. What is the girl's name?
Ashley.
Ashley. Ashley, I'm going to call on you to do me a favor, please. You're in Australia. If there's any way you could promote this show to the Australians, I would appreciate it very much. And I'll tell you why. Because I understand that in Australia, they enjoy the Aftermath, which is a great show, but it's only on for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a year. I have somebody being interviewed every week, or shows like this where we solicit questions from the audience. And this would be great if we could capture the Australian audience to look at this. They have a year's worth of interviews that will back up why Scientology should be done away with in Australia. And if you get this many people, well, you know, the majority of people watching it in a country, that public opinion has something to do, because somewhere along the way, some member of parliament or your government is going to say, wait a minute, I want to watch this too. And it'll give them ammunition to do away with Scientology totally in Australia.
Yeah, because they have some big problems in Australia right now. Nancy Griffin's Aquatics says.
Wait a minute, say that name again.
Nancy Griffin's Aquatics. I love Ron's book. Will there be a follow-up to Ruthless? Also, how come so many ex-members decide to stay in Clearwater after they leave? Is it to be close to their loved ones who are still in?
Well, on the book, I have had thoughts about writing another book, but until I solidify them so I can get an exact purpose. There's a lot of things I could talk about that happened since that book. It's not determined yet if I'm going to do one, but it's leaning toward that. Now that answers that. Indefinite goddamn answer, but I'm sorry, that's how I feel about it. What was the next part of it?
Why do so many ex-members stay in Clearwater?
Well, I'm guessing on this, and I think she
could have hit it. Yeah,
hit the nail on the head, because you always hope that somehow they're going to do away with the disconnection and you can rejoin your friends, maybe your family, your former employer. I'll tell you something. If Scientology wanted to increase their PR right now, all they'd have to do is say, this connection is off. Everybody can talk to everybody, and that there's no repercussions. Now, the crap is going to hit the fan, but after all that happens, maybe it will settle down, and some services they offer at a nominal price that actually produce what they say it's going to produce could be offered. They could continue that way. As it is now, yeah, people stay there, I think, just as the girl said, to connect up. Chris, do you have something on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think another factor also for some might be that relocating is hard.
Yeah,
it can be expensive. It can be difficult, especially if you're moving to a place you've never been to before. You don't have any connections. So, you know, Clearwater's got a ton of Scientologists, and also under the radar Scientologists, people who are out, but they're not claiming to be out. They're not really, you know, they're not publicly out. The church doesn't know they're out. So it could be that, you know, they're staying there because they're just staying connected with the people that they know and love.
Yeah, and your point about it being expensive to leave, usually if a person has been in Scientology for a lot of years, they've broken those people financially. They had them violate their, you know, fiscal responsibility to keep above board, and most of them are heavily in debt, and maybe they just can't afford to move is another good reason, Chris.
Yep.
Yeah.
Johnny Vival asks, Ron, when you were on Joe Rogan's podcast, did you feel disrespected? The interview seemed to stop abruptly. Did you feel like Joe was implying that you should have had more control over your son and Scientology policy?
You know what? I don't think I felt any of those things. But after the fact, when I realized that we were cut short, I thought, you know what? I could have said more here. I wish he would have kept me on a little longer. But when it was going on, no, like when you're in it, you're not thinking those things. Well, maybe some people are, but
yeah,
I didn't. So, and I felt that my only regret, though, was in the very beginning, I wanted to bring up a point about the church trying to get from the West Dallas police the information that the private investigators took down and were sending in to the Church of Scientology, reports on what they were doing. I had a report, a document from a judge and from an attorney from Madison, Wisconsin, showing that they illegally tried to get this. The way the interview started is I was in the room sitting at the desk. He walked in, picked up the mic and said, "Hi, Ron." We were on the air. And I never had a chance to present that.
Yeah.
And there was never a point in the interview where I could bring it up. That was my only regret. As far as him disrespecting me, I looked at him and I thought, well, this is the way he is. Now, apparently, some people watching it, as a matter of fact, quite a few people felt that he was, people who wrote in, that he didn't respect me for what I had to say, and it could have gone longer. But that was the audience reaction to it. And if you look at it and look at the comments they made, that was the way it was. Did I answer that question, Tony?
Yeah, I think so. And my personal perception on it was, you know, I've seen a lot of Joe's stuff, obviously, and that's the first time I saw him rattled. Scientology actually rattled him with that letter and contacting his manager. He was spooked. So I think that also changed the approach of that interview for him, because I've never seen him spooked like that. So,
well, how about after the show? You remember when he walked out? What did
That's
he
what I'm
say?
saying.
You were there.
he's like, "I'm never touching Scientology again. 'Cause I'm fucking done with Scientology," quote unquote. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, I hope I answered the question, sir.
Yeah. Cindy says, "How do the public Scientologists justify what they do and the disconnection policy? The public Scientologists have access to the internet and deal with the public. So how can they know what they know and still do what they do?"
Because, all right, well, here we go. It's going to take me right back to the beginning of the show. Relative importance. It's relatively more important to keep being a, quote, good Scientologist, unquote. Disregard all those things that are happening that are bad, the abuses, the disconnection, the broken families. Disregard that, but think to yourself, I must do my part to keep Scientology on the road because it will save mankind. I'm telling you, there's a perfect example of being fucked up on relative importance, because that's what they think, that it's more important to being a good Scientologist than it is to saying, hey, wait a minute, why are you doing this to people, and going into the teeth of it? Because first of all, you know that you're probably going to be declared, or you're going to get a security check and it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. So you park that and you think, I'm going to be a good Scientologist. That is relatively more important. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely agree on all of that. And also, I mean, there's a lot of factors to it, right? Another thing that enters in is the narcissism that is created within Scientology. So it's very much about I'm getting mine, and if other people are getting in my way or are somehow impeding my spiritual progress, then they need to be forcefully moved out of the way. That is completely in line with everything Hubbard wrote and said about, you know, getting up the bridge and being responsible. And also the this might sound a little weird, but for me, I only saw the individuals who were being declared suppressive or being, you know, gotten off out of the way. I didn't look at that as, oh, they're breaking up a family. I looked at it as that person is the one who's responsible for this. That guy who's getting declared, or that woman who's getting declared, they're the ones who brought this on themselves. We didn't do this to them. They knew the rules and they broke the rules. So it's on them. It's not on us. If they would only change their mind, if they would only see the light, if they would only get their ethics in, quote unquote. That was the main way we talked about it. We didn't talk about people seeing the light. We said if those, you know, guys would just get their ethics in and come clean on all of their moral transgressions, on all of their overts, then they would come back in the fold. So it was all the blame was placed on that person who was being forcefully disconnected or shunned, not on us. We're the good guys. We're unquestionably the good guys. Everything we do is good.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I'm going to go back to something you just said.
Yeah.
That is how can I put this without, because you just said a mouthful.
Yeah, I know.
And okay, I'll let it go. Let's let it go. And as we're going along over the next few minutes, I can think of a way to put this, because I don't want it to one up what you just said, because let's let the people with that in their mind. Go ahead.
Jesse says, I love you and admire you guys so much. Thank you for everything you do for exposing Scientology. I'm from Bulgaria, and I'm curious, are you familiar with how Scientology is spread across Europe?
Well, all I know is what they say, but then what it is another story. I mean, if you listen to events or see what Tony Ortega has to say about an event that's held, they're saying that Scientology is spreading faster than ever in its history. 10 times, 100 times, 1,000,000 times is faster, whatever it is. And as far as I'm concerned, if you look at the facts of it, like people who live in an area where there's an organization and they go by it, there's no cars in the parking lot, there's nobody in the organization. So I have no idea what the truth of it is, except that it's going down. Chris, do you have a point on that?
Yeah, it's really not a whole lot different in Europe than it is in the United States or anywhere else in the world. They propagate their messaging. They try to find people who have issues and get them on board. But the exposure that has occurred all over the internet and media prevents that, and so they're just kind of shrinking.
Yeah, that's my take on it.
The funny dichotomy of Scientology, they have a huge issue. They have a critical problem. Their whole thing, typically religions and cults will travel to third world countries and nations that are struggling to get recruits and to grow their membership. But Scientology needs their members to pay in. So when you're going to really poor, desperate areas of the world, you're not going to, that model doesn't work anymore. So
Nope, you're right, because maybe somebody in Bulgaria or some of the third world countries in Africa, there's no way they could afford a service.
Yeah.
And Scientology would not be interested in going down there and giving them some valuable information that it could change their lives for nothing.
It's interesting.
Like as a donation to a charity.
Exactly.
You're dreaming if you think they would do that.
Nancy says, the model weapon behind Chris, is that from Star Wars or Firefly? I've always wanted to know. Watch his show all the time. Thank you.
Yes, that is Han Solo's blaster, from a recreation of it from Star Wars. That is what that is. A fan actually made that for me. His name's Flint Reed from the UK.
Wow.
Awesome. Jackson Grant says, since public Scientologists coming into the orgs have fallen off, aren't most Sea Org members who have anything to do with the public in a never-ending roller coaster of lower conditions?
I would say so, because the seniors are saying one of the datums in Scientology is all statistics are internal. In other words, no matter what somebody says on the outside or what's happening, if your building were to burn down and your stats weren't up that week, they would say, no, that doesn't mean anything. It's your fault that the statistics weren't up. So yes, I'm sure they're living in lower conditions on a week-to-week basis. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they as you mentioned with the relative importances, the other thing that that they tend to really mess up on in the world and within the world of Scientology is correct targeting. In other words, getting the right source of the problem. Yeah. And Hubbard says that, I think, as you just mentioned, it's always any trouble we have is always internally created.
Yeah.
So they're always, it's always blaming the victim. It's always going back in on, well, we're not doing it right. We're the ones who are at fault. So we have to just work harder or more industriously or whatever. And they never look at the big picture, right? Again, relative importances. So they are constantly punishing the wrong people for the wrong things. And this is, again, how they lose members.
Au contraire. I wanted to use that French phrase. There is one exception to it. And that's their public relation. That is entirely internally created.
Yes. Yes.
That's the one exception. They shoot themselves in the foot with 8-gauge shotguns, not a 22, okay? They've created all of these scenes. Look, I'm doing an international, and it is international, show exposing them. Why? Because of the way I was treated and the way I lived my life. They created that. How about you, Chris?
Absolutely. We've always said from day one when we get out, these guys are professionals at making their own enemies. You know, none of this had to happen the way that it did. I didn't have to become a public critic. You didn't have to become a public critic. Had we been actually treated with humanity, compassion, and empathy, none of this would be happening.
Yes.
But those are foreign words in Scientology. It's all about ethics and discipline and enforcement and punishment. And that drives people away, and it makes them mad. And it's because it's abusive, it's destructive.
I agree. And I'll tell you what, I've thought about this as we were speaking, and I will bring up this one point, because you said that the staff or the superiors to the staff would say to a person, well, you knew the rules. You knew the rules about this. They knew the rules. No, they didn't. If when I got in Scientology, they would have said, now look, here's what you can get. Here's the gains you can get out of it. But there's one point I'd like to make, and that is this. If you become a Scientologist and you go against anything we say or against us or try to publicly shame us, we're going to make your family disconnect from you. So you would just want to let you know that before you get started. Would you have pursued Scientology if they said that to you and you will lose all your friends? I would have said, hey, fuck you, man.
Of course.
I'm going to join the Foreign Legion, you know?
No, first they have to do the indoctrination so that you don't think that disconnection is actually disconnection. Exactly. You know, you have it redefined in your head. That's really all I meant. I think you're spot on with that.
Oh, no, I know what you meant, but I'm just saying, I even had an attorney say to me, oh, look, Ron, you knew the rules. In other words, when I left, I knew I was going to lose my family. If they would have said this to me on the very first day, I would have never gone into Scientology.
Exactly.
Anyway.
So we actually have two more super chats, which we'll get to because I know we're at the end of the hour here.
Okay, go ahead.
So Slyna says, heard from Shelton about Sea Org pay increase. Is that true? Was there a Sea Org pay increase?
Was there a Sea Org pay increase? Well, let's put it this way. In England, in the 70s when I was there, I think they were getting paid something like £6 a week, which would have been in those days about $12 a week. When I went to the international base, we were getting $30 a week. And then I think in the 90s, it went to 50, which was like $46 and change. That's the pay increases. Do you recall those, Chris?
Oh, yeah. No, exactly that. And I've been told by in an interview I did with a woman named Bree Mood a few months ago, she said that they had bumped it up to 100.
Wow.
A week. Now, that's one person's testimony, so I can't say yay, nay, but that's what I was told.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting. And then Nick, $2, €2, I should say. Thank you, Nick. Did you like Jesse Prince's book? It's to both of you guys.
Oh, I did. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah.
Yeah, very much.
It was very informative.
Very informative. And of course, I know Jesse for years. Just a real old friend of mine. We've had a lot of laughs together, even when we were in the Sea organization. Go on, Sean.
No, that's we got a ton of other questions. I just want to say thank you to the chat and for the super chats. And every week, you guys can pop in the chat and ask questions. But otherwise, I'll let you guys wrap it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Sean, do you have any closing remarks to make?
Chris.
Oh, just thank you very much for having me on.
I'm sorry. Sean is trying to get my attention.
You said Sean.
Oh, okay. Chris.
Don't let it happen again.
No more mistakes, Sean, please.
No, I just want to say thanks for giving me the opportunity to come on and answer people's questions. I always enjoy doing this. And by the way, I did an interview with Jesse Prince also on my channel that I thought was one of the best or better interviews that I've done. He was a wealth of information. I've never spoken with anybody who has had a gun pointed at David Miscavige for a period of time.
I know.
That was a pretty unique guy who had a pretty unique experience in Scientology.
I know, yeah. And I also had him on my show, an interview, and I enjoyed it very much. Okay, Chris, I want to appreciate you coming on. And as always, you're just a wealth of great information. And I appreciate what you're doing. So thank you. And to close, remember everybody, if you'd like to contribute to this, you can become a patron. Just go to my website, therealronmiscavige.com, and contribute something, and you turn from being an observer or, you know, somebody who is enjoying the show, there's nothing wrong with that, to a participant because you're doing something about it. So anyway, for myself and Chris, I am Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. See you on the next episode. Bye-bye.